The War Council chamber hummed with the nervous energy of a species that had just realized it might have made a catastrophic mistake. General Kava'thorn stood at the head of the obsidian table, her 4 eyes scanning the holographic displays that flickered in the dim light. 23 star systems. Gone. Not conquered. Not surrendered. Simply gone. Wiped clean by an enemy that fought like they had nothing to lose and everything to prove. "Someone explain to me," she said, her voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded volcanic eruptions, "how a species that only achieved faster than light travel 40 cycles ago is currently dismantling our eastern front." Tactical Officer Emrendax shifted uncomfortably, his scales rippling with anxiety. "General, the humans are not following standard combat protocols. They're not following any protocols. Yesterday, one of their vessels rammed straight through our flagship's shield array. The pilot survived. When we recovered the wreckage, we found a handwritten note taped to the console that said, 'Worth it.'" Kava'thorn's jaw tightened. "They're using suicide tactics?" "No, General. That's the disturbing part. The pilot ejected at the last possible second. The ramming was calculated, precise. And apparently, according to intercepted communications, the human command structure gave her a promotion and something called a meme status for the maneuver." "A what?" "We're still trying to translate the cultural significance, but it appears to be a form of social currency based on doing things that are simultaneously brilliant and absolutely insane." Another officer, Vex Ela, leaned forward, her translator struggling to keep up with her rapid speech. "General, if I may, we've been monitoring their military channels. The humans don't just fight recklessly. They celebrate it. They have songs about it. We intercepted a transmission from one of their destroyer captains who was singing something called Highway to Hell while engaging 3 of our cruisers, alone. She won." Kava'thorn felt a headache forming in her frontal lobe. 1 destroyer against 3 cruisers. "Yes, General. And she was singing. Quite enthusiastically, from what our audio analysts report." The general pulled up a tactical feed from the most recent engagement at the Korvath sector. The footage showed a human frigate, designation Defiant Spirit, performing what could only be described as a barrel roll through a debris field while laying down suppression fire across a 60-degree arc. The ship's hull was scorched, leaking atmosphere from at least 7 breaches, and according to the data, operating on backup power. It destroyed 2 of her heavy interceptors before warping away at an angle that should have torn the vessel apart from gravitational stress. "Tell me about their commander," Kava'thorn said quietly. Rendax pulled up a file. "Captain Jessica Marlowe, age 32, standard cycles, former test pilot. Reprimanded 14 times for violating safety regulations. Promoted anyway because, and I quote from her service record, she gets results, and her crew would follow her into a star if she asked them to. Have we attempted diplomatic contact with this Marlowe?" "Yes, General, 3 times. The first time, she responded with a 2-word phrase that our translators flagged as extremely vulgar. The second time, she sent back a video message of her crew laughing. The third time..." Vexila paused, as if unsure whether to continue. "What happened the third time?" "She accepted our request for a meeting. She's on her way here. Now. She should arrive within the hour." The chamber fell silent. Every officer turned to stare at Kava'thorn, waiting for the explosion. Instead, the general simply closed all 4 eyes and took a deep breath. "Security status? Elevated to maximum. We have 4 battalions surrounding this facility, anti-ship batteries online, and every scanning system we possess focused on the approach vector. If she tries anything, we'll vaporize her ship before she gets within weapons range." "Good, because if the reports are accurate, Captain Marlowe's definition of diplomatic meeting might involve explosive decompression and hand-to-hand combat." Kava'thorn dismissed the council and made her way to the observation deck. Below, The military complex sprawled across the canyon floor, a fortress that had never fallen in 3,000 cycles of galactic conflict. Automated defenses hummed with lethal readiness, shields shimmered at full power. Everything was prepared for treachery, which is exactly what worried her. The humans didn't do treachery. They did something far more unpredictable. They did whatever worked, regardless of whether it made sense, violated physics, or horrified every military strategist in the galaxy. A proximity alert chimed. The human vessel had dropped out of warp. Kava'thorn watched the view screen as a battered frigate appeared, listing slightly to port, trailing coolant vapor like a comet's tail. The ship looked like it had been through a shredder, and then reassembled by someone who was drunk and angry. It was still fully armed. "This is Captain Marlowe, of the Terran Alliance ship, Defiant Spirit. Requesting permission to dock and talk this out, like reasonable people who haven't been trying to kill each other for the past 6 months. Her voice was casual. Friendly, even. Like she was arriving for a dinner party instead of entering the heart of enemy territory, surrounded by enough firepower to reduce her ship to constituent atoms. Kava'thorn activated her comm. "Permission granted, Captain. Follow the guidance beacons to Docking Bay 7. Be advised, you will be under armed escort at all times." "Wouldn't have it any other way, General. Though I have to say, the welcome committee seems a bit excessive. I only brought 3 people." "Your reputation precedes you, Captain. I'll take that as a compliment." 20 minutes. Later, Kava'thorn stood in the secure meeting room, flanked by 6 heavily armed guards, watching as the door slid open to admit the human delegation. Captain Jessica Marlowe walked in first, and Kava'thorn had to suppress a reaction. The human was tall for her species, with short, dark hair and eyes that seemed to constantly evaluate everything for either tactical advantage or entertainment value. She wore a flight suit that had clearly seen extensive combat, patched in multiple places and bearing scorch marks that no amount of cleaning could remove. More concerning was the casual confidence in her walk. This was someone who had faced death repeatedly and decided it wasn't that impressive. Behind her came 2 crew members. One was a massive human male carrying what appeared to be a portable medical kit. The other was a smaller female with bright blue hair and more electronic devices strapped to her arms than Kava'thorn had seen outside of a hacking collective. "General Kava'thorn," Marlowe said, inclining her head in a gesture that might have been respect or might have been mockery. It was difficult to tell with humans. "Thanks for agreeing to meet. I know we've been making life difficult for your forces lately." "Difficult?" Kava'thorn repeated flatly. "You've destroyed 47 of our vessels, crippled 3 orbital platforms, and somehow convinced the Vex Republic to switch sides, using nothing but a cargo hold full of something called coffee, and a very persuasive argument about the benefits of not being conquered." Marlowe grinned. "Yeah, the Vex are great once you get them properly caffeinated. They were actually really reasonable about the whole thing. Plus, they make excellent allies. Did you know they can see in 17 different spectrums? Terrible poker players, though. Every emotion shows up in ultraviolet. Captain, you're aware this is a war." "Oh, absolutely. That's why I'm here. To end it." Kava'thorn felt her secondary heart skip a beat. "End it?" "Yeah. See, General, here's the thing. We've been analyzing your strategy, your tactics, your entire military doctrine. It's impressive. Very thorough. Very logical. Very predictable." The guards shifted, hands moving toward weapons. Marlowe didn't even glance at them. "You fight wars the way they're supposed to be fought," she continued. "By the numbers, calculated risks, acceptable losses. Problem is, humans don't really do that. We can't afford to." "Do you know why?" "Because you're reckless," Kava'thorn said coldly. Marlowe's grin widened. "Oh, we're way past reckless, General. We're survivors. And survivors don't follow the rules, because the rules were written by people who had the luxury of resources and time and backup plans. Humans? We evolved on a death world, spent most of our history fighting each other, nearly wiped ourselves out half a dozen times, and only made it to space because we were too stubborn to accept that we probably shouldn't. She stepped closer to the table, and Kava'thorn noticed something she hadn't before. The human's hands were scarred, burns, cuts, the kind of damage that came from physically repairing systems under fire. So, when you came to our borders and demanded we submit to your empire, we looked at your fleet and your superior technology and your 1,000-year military tradition, and we said, yeah, okay, but have you tried not being in a fleet formation when someone throws a star at you? You did not throw a star, redirected a solar flare using gravitational manipulation and some truly questionable physics. Technically not a war crime if the enemy fleet happens to be in the way when it arrives. My science officer Tara here worked out the math. She gestured to the blue-haired woman, who waved cheerfully. 47 hours of calculations, Tara said. No sleep, lot of energy drinks, absolutely worth it for the look on their faces when their sensors picked up the radiation spike. Kava'thorn stared at them. You realize you could have caused a cascade effect that destabilized the entire system. Could have, Marlowe agreed. Didn't, though. That's the thing about humans, General. We understand risk. We just have a different relationship with it than you do. Every day we survive is a day we weren't supposed to make it. So we take chances. We improvise. We do things that make sense only if you're already convinced you're going to die anyway. That's not strategy. That's madness. It's both. Marlowe leaned on the table, her expression shifting from casual to serious. And that's what I came here to explain. You can't win this war, General. Not because you're not strong enough or smart enough or brave enough, but because you're fighting an opponent that doesn't care about winning the way you understand it. We just care about surviving. And we're really, really good at that. Kava'thorn's claws flexed against the table surface. You came all this way to threaten me. No, I came to offer you a deal. The room went very quiet. What kind of deal? Marlowe straightened. You withdraw from human space. You leave us alone. In exchange, we stop actively dismantling your empire and start helping you with your actual problem. What problem? The Krynos Swarm? The extra-dimensional invasion force that your high command has been trying to keep quiet for the last year. The one that's currently eating through your northern territories and will reach your core worlds in approximately 8 months. Every guard in the room tensed. Kava'thorn felt ice forming in her veins. How do you know about that? Because we're humans, General. We're nosy. We hack things. We steal information. And we pay attention when an empire suddenly decides to expand aggressively in one direction while pulling forces away from another. You're not trying to conquer us for resources or territory. You're trying to create a buffer zone between the swarm and your homeworld. Kava'thorn said nothing. Couldn't say anything. Marlowe continued, her voice softer now. Here's what we know. The swarm doesn't negotiate, doesn't retreat, doesn't stop. They're not interested in conquest, just consumption. Your conventional tactics don't work because they don't have supply lines to cut or morale to break. They're a force of nature, wearing the shape of an army. And you believe you can stop them? No, Marlowe smiled, but it was a different kind of smile now. Sharp, predatory. We believe we can kill them, because that's what humans do, General. We look at impossible odds, and we find a way. Not because we're special or chosen or destined, but because giving up means extinction. And we decided a long time ago that extinction wasn't going to be our story. She reached into her flight suit and pulled out a data chip, sliding it across the table. That contains everything we've learned about the swarm. Their biology, their movement patterns, their weaknesses. Yes, they have weaknesses. Everything does. You just have to be willing to look close enough, and more importantly, be crazy enough to test your theories in combat. Kava'thorn stared at the chip. Why would you help us? Because spite is a powerful motivator, and I really don't like things that eat planets. Also, because if the swarm gets through your territory, they'll eventually reach ours. Might as well stop them now while we have allies, even if those allies recently tried to conquer us. We're not allies. Not yet. But give it time. Marlowe turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and General? One more thing. That blade you carry, the ceremonial one, the one that's been passed down through your family for generations. Kava'thorn's hand unconsciously moved to the weapon at her side. You're going to need it. The swarm doesn't die from long-range weapons. Not permanently. You have to get close. Personal. Messy. So keep it sharp, because where we're going, ancient weapons and modern problems are going to meet in really interesting ways. As the humans walked out, Kava'thorn stood frozen, processing everything that had just happened. Vex-Ela approached carefully. Ha! General, what are your orders? Kava'thorn picked up the data chip, feeling its weight. Such a small thing to contain information that could change everything. Verify the information. If it's accurate. She paused, looking at the door the humans had exited through. If it's accurate, we're going to do something unprecedented. We're going to trust them. Is that wise? Probably not. But then again, wisdom hasn't been getting us very far against the swarm. Maybe it's time to try reckless. She activated her command channel. All forces, stand down from active engagement with human vessels. Initiate communication protocols for temporary ceasefire. And someone get me a full tactical analysis of Captain Marlowe's service record. If we're going to work with humans, I need to understand how they think. That might be impossible, General. Then we'll settle for learning how to predict their unpredictability. She looked down at the blade at her side. The one her grandmother had carried, and her grandmother before that. A weapon forged in honor and tradition. She drew it slowly, watching the light play across the edge. Still sharp after all these cycles, still deadly. You humans are reckless, she had said. Marlowe's response echoed in her mind. That's how we survive. Perhaps, Kava'thorn thought, there was something to be learned from that philosophy. Perhaps survival wasn't about following the rules or maintaining honor or fighting the way wars were supposed to be fought. Perhaps survival was about adapting, changing, becoming something your enemy couldn't predict or counter. Perhaps it was time the Galactic Empire learned to be a little reckless. The war was far from over. But for the first time in months, Kava'thorn felt something she hadn't felt since the swarm first appeared. Hope. And that, she realized, might be the most dangerous weapon of all. The Krynos Swarm hit the combined fleet 3 weeks later, exactly where Marlowe said they would. Kava'thorn watched from the bridge of her flagship, the Eternal Vigilance, as sensors lit up with contacts. Thousands of them. Organic vessels that pulsed with bioluminescence, moving in patterns that defied conventional physics. They didn't fly so much as swim through space, undulating like deep-sea creatures hunting in the dark. All ships, hold formation, she commanded, her voice steady despite the crawling sensation in her gut. Wait for the humans. Her tactical officer, promoted after Mrendax transferred to the new Joint Command structure, looked nervous. General, they're 3 minutes out. The swarm will be in firing range in 90 seconds. Then we have 90 seconds. Maintain position. On the view screen, the swarm advanced like a living tide. No ships. No technology in the traditional sense. Just flesh and chitin and something else. Something that existed partially outside normal space. Weapons fire from preliminary skirmishes had shown the problem immediately. Energy weapons passed through them as if they weren't entirely there. Kinetic rounds hit, but didn't penetrate deeply enough to matter. The creatures regenerated damage faster than conventional forces could inflict it. They were nightmares given form and purpose. 60 seconds to contact. Kava'thorn's grip tightened on her command console. Trusting the humans had been a gamble. A desperate, possibly suicidal gamble. If Marlowe didn't show up, if this was some elaborate deception, the entire galactic fleet would be overrun in minutes. 30 seconds. The swarm creatures opened their maws, revealing rows of crystallized bone that could tear through hull plating like paper. Bioplasma began building in their throats, the same weapon that had melted entire defense platforms. 15 seconds. General, we have to engage. Hold. 10 seconds. Then reality tore. Open. Not a warp gate. Not a jump point. Something else. Space folded in on itself with a sound like shattering glass, and through the rupture came the human fleet. Except, fleet was too generous a term. It was a collection of every functioning ship humanity could scrape together. Military vessels flew alongside converted mining barges. Sleek destroyers accompanied civilian transports that had been hastily armed with weapons that probably violated multiple safety regulations. One ship appeared to be made entirely from welded-together cargo containers with engines strapped to the back. Leading them was the Defiant Spirit, still leaking coolant, still bearing the scars of 100 battles. "Sorry, we're late." Marlowe's voice crackled across all channels. "Had to pick up some friends. Hope you saved some for us." The human ships didn't slow down. They accelerated directly into the swarm formation, firing weapons that Kava'thorn had never seen before. Something that looked like controlled explosions of pure magnetic force, ripping through the bioorganic hulls and leaving gaping wounds that actually stayed open. "What are those weapons?" Vex-Ela demanded. "Railguns," came a new voice on the command channel. Tara, the blue-haired human scientist, sounded entirely too pleased with herself. "Modified with resonance harmonics tuned to disrupt extra-dimensional matter cohesion. Basically, we're hitting them in all the dimensions they're hiding in simultaneously. Turns out the swarm is tough because it's only partly here. Make it fully present in our reality, and suddenly it bleeds like everything else." A swarm creature lunged at the Defiant Spirit, bioplasma discharge lighting up the void. Marlowe's ship twisted impossibly, presenting its armored underbelly while deploying something from its cargo bay. Mines. Hundreds of them. Each one radiating the same multidimensional disruption field. The swarm creature hit the minefield and came apart, in a spray of ichor and screaming energy. The sound transmitted through subspace made Kava'thorn's audio implants shut down automatically to prevent damage. "All ships, weapons free," Kava'thorn commanded. "Target the wounded ones. Don't let them regenerate." The combined fleet opened fire. Traditional energy weapons suddenly became effective against creatures that the human weapons had forced fully into normal space. The swarm reeled, trying to adapt, but adaptation took time they no longer had. "General, we're receiving tactical data from the human vessels," her communications officer reported. "They're highlighting weak points in real time, spots where the dimensional anchoring is strongest." On Kava'thorn's display, targeting overlays appeared, marking specific locations on each swarm creature. Places where concentrated fire would do maximum damage. The humans weren't just fighting, they were teaching. A cluster of swarm vessels broke formation, trying to flank the human line. Marlowe's voice cut through the chaos again. "Oh no you don't. Echo Squadron, you're up." 6 human fighters detached from the main fleet. Small, agile, and according to every calculation Kava'thorn had ever learned, completely outmatched. The pilots should have been terrified. Instead, she heard laughter over the open channel. The fighters dove into the swarm formation, weaving between creatures 10 times their size, laying down fire that carved glowing trails through organic armor. One pilot, call sign Hotshot, flew his fighter through the internal cavity of a creature that had just opened its maw, firing the entire way through and emerging from the other side, covered in biological matter but intact. "That's going to be a pain to clean," Hotshot remarked casually. "Worth it, though. You see that shot? That was art." "You're buying drinks when we get back." Another pilot, Monarch, replied while executing a barrel roll that shouldn't have been possible at that velocity. That was showing off. There's a difference? Kava'thorn found herself experiencing something she hadn't felt in decades of military service. She was watching humans fight, truly fight, and it was simultaneously the most terrifying and inspiring thing she had ever witnessed. They treated combat like a game they were determined to win through sheer audacity and creative violence. A swarm bioship, larger than the others, emerged from deeper in their formation. It was different. Armored plates covered most of its surface, and the bioplasma building in its core was bright enough to read on sensors from across the battlefield. "That's a harvester." Tara's voice had lost its playful tone. "They're the ones that crack planets. If it charges that weapon fully, it'll punch through every shield we have and detonate the Vigilance's reactor. Time to full charge? 3 minutes. Maybe less." Kava'thorn made the calculation instantly. None of her ships could reach it in time. The human fighters were too small to carry weapons that could damage something that size. The railguns were powerful, but would need sustained fire to penetrate those armored plates. They were out of options. Then, Marlowe's ship broke formation and accelerated directly toward the harvester. "Captain, what are you doing?" Kava'thorn demanded. "Something stupid. Hotshot. Monarch? I need a distraction. Something memorable." "How memorable are we talking?" "Make them write songs about it." The two fighters peeled off, racing ahead of the defiant spirit. They split up, attacking the harvester from opposite angles, their weapons' fire doing almost nothing to the thick armor, but definitely getting its attention. The massive creature shifted, smaller appendages emerging to swat at the annoying insects buzzing around it, which left its ventral surface momentarily exposed. Marlowe's ship dropped what looked like its entire payload of mines directly into the opening, then fired maneuvering thrusters at maximum burn, reversing course so violently that Kava'thorn could see the hull plating buckling from the stress. The mines detonated inside the harvester. The explosion was silent in the vacuum of space, but the shockwave was visible, an expanding sphere of disrupted dimensional energy. The harvester convulsed, its charging weapon destabilizing. Bioplasma meant to destroy a capital ship instead erupted inside its own body. When the light cleared, the harvester was drifting in pieces, no longer a threat. "Defiant spirit, status report." Kava'thorn barked, static, then coughing, then Marlowe's voice, shaky but alive. "Still here. Ship's not happy about it. Pretty sure we just voided every warranty we ever had. But we're still flying. Mostly." The battle raged for another hour. The swarm, faced with an enemy that could actually hurt them and tactics they couldn't predict, began to falter. They tried to retreat, but the humans had positioned ships at every exit vector, turning what should have been an escape route into a killing field. When the last swarm vessel finally disintegrated under combined fire, the fleet hung in space, exhausted, damaged, but victorious. Kava'thorn opened a channel to Marlowe's ship. "Captain, your ship appears to be held together primarily by hope and spite at this point. I'm sending repair crews." "Appreciated, General. Though I think spite is actually the main structural component now. Hope is more of a cosmetic feature." "How did you know that tactic would work against the harvester?" A pause. "I didn't. Not for certain. But I knew that big usually means vulnerable once you get past the armor. Everything has a soft center if you're willing to get close enough to find it." Kava'thorn looked at the blade at her side. Still sharp. Still unused in this battle. She had expected to need it. Expected close combat. Hand-to-hand fighting in corridors against an enemy that wouldn't stop. Instead, the humans had found another way. A reckless, improvised, absolutely insane way. And it had worked. "General," Vexila approached quietly, "we're receiving reports from other sectors. The swarm is pulling back. They're actually retreating. This has never happened before." "They're learning," Kava'thorn realized. They've encountered an enemy that hurts them, that can kill them permanently. They're adapting their strategy. Should we pursue? Kava'thorn thought about it. The logical answer was yes. Press the advantage. Don't give the enemy time to regroup. But she found herself asking a different question. What would the humans do? Marlowe's voice came over the channel, unbidden. We'd let them run. For now. Give them time to be afraid. Fear is a weapon too, General. Let them tell the rest of the swarm what happened here. Let them spread the word that there's something in this galaxy that fights back, something that doesn't die easy. Psychological warfare. The best kind. Costs nothing. Lasts forever. And the enemy does half the work for you. 3 days later, Kava'thorn stood on the observation deck of a joint command station, watching as human and galactic engineers worked side by side to repair the battered fleet. The cultures clashed in interesting ways. Galactic engineers followed precise protocols and established procedures. Human engineers eyeballed measurements, used tools for purposes they weren't designed for, and somehow made it all work anyway. Marlowe joined her at the viewport, carrying 2 containers of the human beverage coffee. She offered one to Kava'thorn. Fair warning, this stuff is basically rocket fuel in liquid form. Your species might process it differently. Kava'thorn accepted the container carefully, taking a small sip. It was bitter, hot, and sent a jolt of energy through her system that made her secondary hearts accelerate. This is a weapon, she said flatly. Yeah, but it's our weapon, and we're willing to share. Consider it a peace offering. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the repair work continue. You were right, Kava'thorn said finally, about everything. Our tactics, our predictability, our failure to adapt. We've been fighting wars the same way for millennia, because it worked. Until it didn't. Hey, no shame in that. Humans spent centuries fighting each other with basically sticks and rocks before we figured out there might be better ways. We're not special, General. We're just stubborn. And lucky. Mostly lucky. I called you reckless. Marlowe grinned. You did. During our first meeting, right before I explained that recklessness is how we survive. Kava'thorn drew her blade slowly, watching the light reflect off its edge. An ancient weapon. A symbol of honor and tradition. She had carried it for years, expecting to die with it in her hand, fighting some glorious last stand. Instead, she had learned something more valuable. My ancestors forged this blade, she said quietly. They believed that honor came from following the codes, respecting the traditions, fighting with dignity. But I think they missed something. I think real honor comes from surviving, from doing whatever it takes to protect your people, even if it means abandoning everything you thought you knew about how wars should be fought. She turned to face Marlowe directly, raising the blade in a formal salute. You taught us that, Captain. You and your reckless, impossible, utterly infuriating species. You showed us that survival isn't about being the strongest or the most advanced. It's about being adaptable, creative, willing to break every rule if that's what it takes. Marlowe returned the salute, her expression serious for once. General, with all due respect, we didn't teach you anything you didn't already know. We just reminded you. Every species that makes it to space had to survive impossible odds at some point. You've just been safe for so long that you forgot what desperation feels like. What it means to fight with your back against the wall, and nothing but improvisation and determination keeping you alive. And now you remember. Now you're dangerous again. Kava'thorn sheathed her blade. The swarm will return. Oh, definitely. They're persistent like that. But next time, we'll be ready. Both of us. Together. An alliance. Unless you've got a better idea. Though, I should warn you, alliances with humans come with certain side effects. We're loud. We argue constantly. We'll probably try to introduce your species to increasingly questionable foods, and we have this terrible habit of questioning authority at every possible opportunity. I'll take my chances. Kava'thorn allowed herself a small smile, something she rarely did. Besides, after fighting alongside humans, dealing with galactic bureaucracy will seem peaceful by comparison. They sealed the agreement with a handshake, human style, and Kava'thorn felt the strength in Marlowe's grip. The hands of someone who had piloted damaged ships through impossible situations, who had faced death repeatedly and kept flying anyway. The hands of a survivor. As Marlowe left to check on her crew, Kava'thorn remained at the viewport, watching the stars. The war wasn't over. The swarm was still out there. Still a threat. But for the first time since the invasion began, she felt ready. Not because the fleet was stronger, though it was. Not because their weapons were better, though they were. But because they had learned the most important lesson any warrior could learn. Rules were guidelines. Tactics were suggestions. Honor was important, but survival was essential. And sometimes, the best way to win was to fight like you had nothing to lose and everything to prove, just like the humans. Reckless, impossible, beautiful humans. She raised her coffee container in a silent toast to absent allies, to unlikely friendships forged in fire, and to the strange twist of fate that had turned enemies into partners. The blade at her side felt lighter now, as if, understanding that it was no longer just a symbol of the past, but a tool for the future. A future that would be written not by following ancient traditions, but by surviving, adapting, and learning from the reckless species that refused to accept defeat as an option. Kava'thorn drained the last of her coffee, feeling its energy surge through her system. Time to get back to work. The swarm was still out there, and when they returned, they would find an enemy that had learned to fight like humans, which meant they would find an enemy that simply refused to die.